Welcome to the Microsoft Azure Data Self-Help Series. My name is Kenny Yu, and today I'll be presenting on how to troubleshoot SQL Server space issue on Azure SQL VM. SQL Server error 9002 is when the SQL Server transaction log is full. To prevent this error, it's important to truncate the logs, properly size the transaction log and this volume, and set the auto growth size. The first step is to check the reason why the log is growing. This can be done using the DME sys.databases and browsing to the column log underscore reuse underscore weight underscore description to see the reason for the log growth. If a log backup is needed, then we will need to back up the transaction log. A backup will allow the log records to be released and the log to be truncated. To back up the transaction log, first click the database, select task, and then select backup. In the backup type drop-down, select transactional log, add a destination, and click OK. To properly size the transaction log, first we need to right-click the database and select Properties. Select Files, and the file type should be log. The size of the initial transaction log should reflect the amount of workload a database is experiencing. Setting in healthy initial size will prevent the transaction log to keep requesting space. However, if the transaction log needs to grow, we want to grow it by a fixed size. The default auto growth size is 64 megabytes and limited to 2 gigs. By setting a fixed size will allow the log to grow at a control rate, and the maximum file size should reflect the amount of disk space it is available for the transaction log to use. However, if the log backup can truncate the log and release the space, then we should not hit the maximum file size. In the event the disk is full, we can follow the previous steps to increase the disk size by using the Azure portal. There could be many reasons why the transaction log is growing, and if the transaction log backup is not able to truncate the logs, then we need to investigate why the log is growing. Please see our online documentation for additional troubleshooting steps on SQL Server, error 9002. To extend the disk size for an Azure SQL VM, there are two options available. The first option is to navigate to the VM resource page on the Azure portal, select the disks, and then choose the disk that requires additional disk space. This will take you to a page where you can click on Size plus Performance. On this page, you can either select a different disk size or change the storage type by selecting the appropriate option from the drop-down menu at the top. Once you have made the necessary changes, save the settings. After the action has been completed, you can go to the Windows Disk Management tool and extend the disk volume as required. The second option is browse to the SQL configuration option on the SQL VM resource page and select the storage configuration. To use the storage configuration, IS extension needs to be installed. Second, it needs to have default name for the storage pool, virtual disk, and volume. Third, no manual disk was added to the volume. Fourth, there is no failover cluster configured. After selecting the storage configuration, select the Config button. Here, I can change the disk size and the number of disks to be added. Please note the warning sign below for the capacity limitations on the VM and disk. For my VM SKU size, it can only support up to 1920 IHOPS and max throughput of 22.5. Therefore, I won't be able to maximize the total disk performance. For more information, please visit our documentations. If the tempdb disk is taking up space, it may be due to temporary objects created in the tempdb. To address this, you can check if there are any long-run transactions that didn't complete, or manually drop the temporary objects in the tempdb. It is recommended to use the temporary storage attached to the VM. To configure the tempdb, you can navigate to the VM resource and select SQL configuration, and then select storage configuration and choose the location for tempdb. You can also configure tempdb, data file, initial size, and auto growth size. However, it is important to follow best practices when changing these settings to avoid adversely impacting performance. Alternatively, you can move tempdb to a separate disk by attaching a new disk and moving tempdb to that drive. If you experience issues with attaching disk to a VM or extending disk, you can create a case under the Azure VM team by selecting the correct service type and providing a detailed description of the issue. This enables the Azure support team to investigate the issue and provide guidance on how to solve it. Remember to provide as much information as possible, such as error messages, screenshots, and steps taken so far to troubleshoot the issue. In this video, we cover how to troubleshoot SQL Server disk issues on Azure SQL VM. Thanks for watching, and we hope the information in this video has been helpful to you.